So, good morning and welcome to the last session of third week. And as you remember, we have been talking about the diagnosis part, and after that we also explored that how we can go about diagnosing the change. Whenever we are discussing about the diagnosis of the change, we discussed various frameworks and models. Now, after discussing various frameworks and models, now we are discussing about that when we are going to implement change successfully, then we also need to care about the resistance that may come from stakeholders. So, in spite of whatever change you want to introduce, you need to ensure that if you want to go for successful implementation, then employees and other stakeholders are communicated, are informed, so that they know what kind of change is being introduced, why it is being introduced, what kind of benefit it would derive for them, and what is the stake for them in that particular change, and basically in what way it is going to affect them. Now, when we are discussing these things, definitely resistance is a part of organizational life, and whenever you are going to introduce change, it is likely to happen. So, the managers or the change managers say specifically must get into action to ensure that they should be able to identify what kind of resistance is there. As you remember, we talked about different kind of resistance that could be there from the employees and what are the reasons for that, and we also discussed about the signs of resistance, active and passive signs of resistance. Now, once you are able to identify the kind of resistance that is there from the stakeholders, then the next task for you is to see that how you are going to manage the resistance. Now, when you go through this and treat the path of resistance, you have to see that what are the various stages through which people go when they are going to resist any effort of introducing a change in the organization. Now, if you look at this, so any change implementation is a process of transition in the sense that you try to move from your current state to a future desired state, right. So, when you start moving from your current state to a desired future state, say for example, suppose you want to introduce any kind of restructuring program in the organization and you want to bring about a change in the structure of the organization. Now, the moment you decide that you want to implement this change in the organization to facilitate better coordination and integration across levels and departments, then you have this you have to go through this process of transition, and then there could be lot of questions among the people. Now, if you look at this process of transition, it starts with what you call anxiety. So, in the beginning there is a lot of anxiety among the minds of the employees that how I am going to cope up with this kind of change, right. Then the next question that comes, that yes, what is there, right. You also feel happy that yes, the organization is going to change and you feel that okay, it may be good for the organization, but still that anxiety is not gone, right. So, you feel happy because you think that yes, organization is going to change for better. Whether it is going to change for better or not, that is a different thing, but ultimately you feel happy because if you think that yes, the current status quo and maintaining this status quo is not good and you need to go for a change because it is affecting performance. So, you feel happy that okay, something is being done. Then you think the next question that comes out to you, that I already talked about, is that fear of threat, fear of failure. What will happen? How it is going to affect me, right? What impact will it have on me? How I am going to be affected by this? So, then again this kind of question may come up, which will be related to the fear which comes into the mind of the employees. Though you accept that okay, the change may be good for the organization, right, but still you have certain fears that how you are going to face in this current restructured organization, right. So, this question that how it is going to affect will definitely come to mind, and which will create certain fear in the mind of the people, right. Then from fear, see you can see two different lines. You think, oh, change is something that is really good or not good, right. So, one line that is going to this, which says that yes, this is bigger than I thought. Oh, this is a big change that the organization want to introduce, and definitely it is going to affect me, right. And then you try to go into a different mode, which is known as denial. That is where you try to deny the change and see that it is not going to impact you. Similarly, if you look at down, it also creates certain threats to you, that your position, your power in the structured organization would get threatened, right. And then from here you move to the next stage. If you are not going to accept it, then you have a guilt feeling. If you are going to accept it, then something else will happen. Look at this, right. Either you are going to deny, or you are going to see that the kind of threat that you are going to have, and out of this you look at it and then see that what you have done for it, right. So, you ask a question to yourself that what role I can play, whether I am going to facilitate this process or not, right, and what will be your position, right. So, you start questioning yourself, who am I, right, and if this guilt feeling persists further, you get into depression, and if you start questioning, then there is a different kind of thing that might happen. You get disillusioned. Disillusion means that you are not able to decide, or you are not able to become sure that whether you are going for it or not going for it, right. So, the moment you raise a question about yourself and your contribution, participation in this change management program, then you see that whether you are going to be really part of it or not going to be part of it. So, this kind of disillusionment may be there, or if it is not there, if you do not question about it, then you get into depression, and finally, it leads to hostility. It means that you do not go for a change, you resist it to the extent possible. But even before that, you can see that if you really, if you do not get into depression, you basically gradually accept it. Okay, let us go accept it, whatever these are, I will accept it, right. And then you try to see that where you are going to be in the future. So, in the restructure position, your position, your power, you see that where you are going to stand up, right. And you find that you are comfortable, then you move forward, right. And you think that okay, in the restructured organization, it is going to benefit the organization, it is going to benefit the people. So, you move forward. So, you go through different stages, maybe denial, maybe disillusionment, maybe acceptance, and maybe become hostile, or you do not go for accepting the change. So, this process of transition is very important. So, any change manager has to see that when they are going to implement change, how they are going to manage change, resistance to change, and then they have to look at the entire process, that how people are behaving in order to better manage the resistance. So, ultimately this leads to these 4 stages. The first stage is denial, where they do not readily accept it. The reason could be the past, right, and they see that this kind of thing has not been successful. Then from the denial stage, they move further to the resistance stage, and at this resistance stage, what happens? They try to resist, right, and then starts asking number of questions that we have dealt with right now. And then next stage, it is a stage of exploration. In this stage, what would happen? I are going to accept it or not accept it, right. If you are not going to accept it, you become totally resistant, become hostile, and if you are going to accept it, then there is a greater commitment to the change, okay. And that is how you move from a past state to what you call a future stage or end desired state, which you want to implement in the organization. So, these are the 4 different stages through which we have discussed in the transition process. Now, after discussing this transition process, what we are going to discuss is this. Let us see that how it is, what are the theoretical framework that is available, right. So, one analysis that is done is known as force field analysis, and in this analysis basically we try to find out that what are the factors which are driving the change and what are the factors which are restraining the factors. So, you need to identify those factors currently which are restraining and those factors which are you can say driving. Suppose you bring about a change in the technology to ensure that the productivity level improves. Now, this change in the technology will have certain resisting forces or restraining forces and certain driving forces. What could be the driving forces? Better productivity, higher market revenues, higher market share, better revenue generation, if more efficiency on the part of the employees to produce more, and so performance would be better of the employees. So, this could be the driving forces. What could be the present resisting forces? Because if you do not want to go for new technology, you do not want to learn new technology to work with, you are satisfied with your status quo, right. You do not want to go for a change because you feel comfortable in your zone, whatever you are doing, you have developed expertise. So, you do not want to go for another thing. So, there could be lot of forces which can act as resisting forces and lot of forces which could be as driving forces. So, you need to identify and then you write here what are your driving forces and what are your resisting forces. Now, the question is what actually happens, whether you should go, you will go for a change or not, it depends upon what. If your driving forces dominate your resisting forces, it means you have been able to manage resistance, and for what you need to do is that you need to communicate people about the benefits, so that it acts as a driving forces, and you also need to work out on those forces which are acting as resisting forces or restraining forces. So, this force fields analysis basically tell you about the various kind of forces which are going to either act in the favor of a change or not act in the favor of the change, right. And that is how you will be able to identify whether you should go for a change or not, and accordingly how you are going to take certain strategies to manage change successfully and reduce the level of resistance among the employees. So, it is a very important issue. If you look at this picture, what does it tell you, right? It means that you are going for some kind of synchronization, and this synchronization is possible only when all these blocks are fitting together, right. So, if you are able to fit it together, it means that you have been able to manage resistance. So, what we are going to discuss next is various tips which help you to manage resistance well on the part of the change managers, and they should be well informed and communicate to the employees that how they go about it. So, this is what we are going to discuss in the next part. So, look at some of the pictures. What we are going to discuss is that how we can overcome resistance to change, how we can help employees to make them more committed towards the change. Now, if you look at this, what does this suggest? That yes, there is a vision and mission statement, right. So, these are the employees. So, what you need to ensure that there should be emphasis on vision and mission statement, and because that becomes a driving force for the change. So, you communicate to the employees what is the vision and mission, and whether we should be ready or whether we should go for this kind of thing or not. So, if employees understand what is the mission statement, what is the vision of this organization, because vision is related to the future course of action that you want to take in a future state. So, what kind of mission statement you have developed, and you need to ensure that employees know what are the mission statement and they are going to work for it. So, if there is a common understanding among the employees that okay, let us go for this kind of vision statement, then they would feel happy, right, and definitely this would bring down the level of resistance among the employees. Look at this, this is the most important thing, communication. So, communicate, communicate and communicate, this is the very important thing, right. So, you need to communicate employees that why you want to go for a change, what are the benefits, what will happen to you. So, if you are able to communicate these things, probably you will be able to reduce the level of resistance, because if you are not able to communicate with people, then they are in the dark, they do not know why you want to go for a change or why organizations have decided to go and implement a particular change. And then in that case, what will happen? There is a lot of anxiety, stress, right, among the people. They will not be able to understand what will happen to them, how this change scenario of the organization is going to treat them. Say for example, you acquire a company, right. So, the employees of the acquired company might feel lot of resistance, because they would be able to understand, unless they would be able to understand what is there in stake for them, how they are going to be considered in the new setup, what will happen to them. There would be lot of resistance in terms of anxiety and stress among the mind of the people. So, what you need to do is that you need to make them understand through this communication that why we are going for a change, how, why it is going to benefit the organization, why it is good for you, right. So, if it is communicated properly, probably you would be able to reduce the level of resistance. So, proper communication is very, very important, right. Now, moving to the third tip, that is the timing when you are going to communicate, right. In most cases it has been observed, especially in case of merger and acquisitions, that this communication to the employees about the restructured organization is happening only after the things are over. They are not communicated beforehand. So, they do not know what is going on in the organization, how organization is going to behave, what will happen to them. So, basically if you look at this particular point, that is time for change, it is very, very important that when you are communicating that yes, we are going for a change, because if you are not going to communicate in timely manner, probably it will not have the desired effect. So, it is very, very important that the moment you are going to decide about implementing a change after the thorough analysis in the best interest of the organization, you should communicate to the employees, and that is going to really work. But if you do not communicate properly in time, then the chances of resistance may be very, very high. Now, next point is also communicate the need for change, right. Now, this is very clear. If you look at this picture, it shows half green and half desert. It means you tell them that why we want to go for a change, and you also tell them that we have done our exercise, we have diagnosed the issue, and this is a major problem which organization is facing, because of which our performance is not doing well, right. You say, for example, you say that you want to go for a technological change because you need to produce in volumes, right. Or you can say that yes, the quality is very important now to sell your products, and since your product is not meeting the quality standards. So, you need to go for certain change in the technology to ensure the best quality products, right. So, you also need to communicate what kind of diagnosis you have done, what frameworks you have used, so that you are able to communicate them that yes, we need to go for a change, because you need to move, you can say, from this to this, from a, you can say, losing perspective to something that is more futuristic, more green, right. And that is why it is very, very important to communicate that why we want to go for a change, what are the reasons because of which the organization or the management or the change managers have decided, based on the analysis that you have done, that you want to go for a change. Moving further, yes, that is also an important approach. Do not go selectively, only informing certain people that what you are going to do and why you want to do. Adopt a more inclusive approach, ensure that everybody is a part of it. So, this basically talks about two aspects, one is involvement and the second is participation. So, you need to ensure that there is a better involvement and participation of all the employees and other stakeholders in the process, right. And if you adopt a more inclusive approach, it means that you allow everybody to have their voice, express their opinion through participation, and also engage them in the process of change, probably the resistance would be less, because otherwise people will think that it is not for me, they do not have anything to do with this, then why should I support it, or why should I go for it. But if you adopt a more inclusive approach, the things would be different, right. So, it is another important thing that we need to discuss, that adopting a more inclusive approach through involvement and participation. Then the next question is related to empowerment, right. In a changed environment and a changed structure, right, what you need to do is that you need to delegate authority down the line. So, one important thing that is very, very important is that you need to go for a more decentralized decision making process, right, and that is what is related to empowering. So, if you are going to empower your employees, then they would be in a better position to take decisions at their level, right, because in empowering what you are doing, basically delegating authority down the line to the people. So, let them decide how they are going to do it and when they are going to do it. So, if this kind of empowerment is given, probably people feel that they are also part of the change system or the change program that you want to introduce, and you can expect better participation and engagement from the employees. But if you do not empower them, then the level of participation and engagement that we have been talking about, having a more inclusive approach, may not work well. So, if you want to go for an inclusive approach, it is always good to first empower them, so that they are able to decide about their participation, their level of participation, the scope of participation that need to be defined, and that would basically result in better engagement of the employees in the process. Now, these are the various steps that we have been discussing, and then definitely addressing their anxieties, and that is to be done before you start moving further, right. So, you need to address their concerns, that how it is going to impact them. See, this is a very big question that have been asked in most of the forums, that why we should go for a change, how it is going to impact me. So, the fear, threat, guilt, all these kind of things can be removed, probably if you are able to better address their concerns, and that would also basically help you to reduce the level of resistance, and they would be able to move towards accepting the change, and you can also expect greater commitment from the employees towards the change, right. And then support and guidance. It is not enough that yes, you empower them and adopt an inclusive approach to ensure better participation and engagement, but at the same time the change managers should be able to provide all kind of resources, support to the employees, so that they work collectively to bring about an effective change in the organization, right. So, without proper coordination and integration of the efforts of all the employees in a collective manner, you cannot expect it, and for that what you need is provide all kind of support that would be required from the management perspective, right. And that is where you need to assure your support and guidance if employees are ready to go for a change, right. Now, another important thing, in a change situation, you also need to ensure that the knowledge and skill base of the people is updated, because they do not know how to they are going to work in a new environment or then in a change situation, especially if you want to bring about a change in the technology, right, or how they are going to behave a new setup. Suppose you want to create a more flatter structure, where the reporting relationship and the mode of the behavior changes, because in that case they are going to take all the decisions, because you are going to create an environment where there will be higher empowerment, right. So, before you move to these kind of changes, you also need to train your employees, so that they can work in the change scenario. Otherwise, it is not going to be effective, and their mindset and the knowledge and skill base would not be can say congruent with the change scenario, and they will not be able to work effectively. So, it is very important to overcome these kind of resistance, and then you always try to provide solution, right. It means that suppose employees are coming out with certain problems, you should be ready to help them, that okay, this is how we need to go about it, right. So, that is equally important. If you look this block, what does it provide? A kind of solution, right. So, any kind of problem which is coming out of any change implementation efforts, you need especially the change managers should be ready to provide some kind of solution to that particular problem, especially related to the employees, so that it is going to help them to understand what is happening and why it is happening. So, what we have discussed so far, especially if you remember correctly, that you are moving from one time zone to another time zone, right. This is the current state and this is the desired state, and the response or the resistance may be either active or it could be either passive, right. And when you are going to manage resistance, you need to understand that what kind of activities or what kind of say reactions are made by the employees at different time periods before they finally accept the change. As we have seen that it starts with denial, then resistance, then acceptance and then change, then you can see what is happening here starting with the stability. So, moving from stability you go for immobilization, means denial, depression. So, these kind of things are related to passive signs of resistance, right. But if you look at stability, anger, bargaining, testing and acceptance, all this is related to active resistance. It means that you want to go for it, but before that you want to ensure how it is going to happen. So, from stability you move here. So, response become very passive. So, you are in denial mode, you do not do anything. Then there is anger, why organizations want to go for it, and then you think that it is something that is inevitable, the organization has to go for it, then you start bargaining in the process. How it is going to impact me, what will happen to me, right, what will happen to my status, power and all kind of things. And then if you are able to successfully bargain, then you test it, otherwise again you get back into the depression, right. And then you come out of it, try to experiment with the new framework and see whether if you are leading to acceptance or not, right. And that is so what managers need to understand is basically the different stages which could be in the resistance, and ultimately when they are going to finally ensure that there is a better acceptance and less resistance to the change. Now, after discussing this resistance to change, let us see what are the different kind of frameworks that have been proposed in the literature. Two factors which are very important, one is the culture and other is the degree of change. Now, if you look at about the impact of culture, it is very high. Why culture is very important when we are talking about the change is that if organization has a strong culture that is high, right, then what will happen? It means that people follow the similar value systems, they share norms and values, right. They are able to take risks, they are empowered, right. So, these are some of the characteristics of culture, which if it is high, then what will happen? Some resistance would be there, but you go for moderate chance of success. Now, if the degree of change is measured very high, then this kind of thing will not be effective, very effective. There will be high resistance, right. Suppose you want to go for radical changes. In incremental changes resistance is less, but in radical changes or transformational changes resistance is very high, right. So, the larger the area of the change, the greater the resistance, right, because people do not oppose, say you can say incremental changes, one after other changes which are happening on a regular basis in the organization. But suppose you want to go for major exercise, or you want to go for major changes, radical or transformational changes, in that case there is a possibility of high resistance to change, right. And now, if you look at this, if there is a low culture, low shared values and similarly change is minimum, then resistance is also very less, and here the chance of success is here. But if you want to go for higher changes, but the cultural values are less important, then in that case again some resistance would be there, but since the culture is impact is very low, people will not go for it, right. So, this suggests that culture has a very important role to play, and another important factor that is there is the degree of change, whether you want to move from incremental change to a more transformational changes. So, you will find that in transformational changes, right, the resistance is higher compared to incremental changes, and culture has an important impact on it. So, after discussing this, let us see what are the various factors which can be used, or how basically organizations go for overcoming resistance to change. So, these are the 6 strategies which is adopted by the management to overcome the resistance. So, we have already talked about it, but again I am just going to give a brief description of these factors here. So, now if you look at this which talks about a situational approach, the 6 method approach that we have discussed here, that is presented here, I am going to provide a brief description of these factors like education commitment, right. So, because there is a less information, resistance is high. So, you need to educate and communicate about the change. Then participation and involvement, that is also a very important approach, where you want to go for an inclusive approach to ensure that everybody participates and engages in the process of the change. Then providing all kind of facilitation and support activities, right, and that would reduce the anxiety and stress. And finally, negotiation and agreement, right. If there is a high resistance, then the change managers need to negotiate and make sure that employees agree for these kind of changes, depending upon the situation and the requirement. Then manipulation and cooperation, this is other method where you are trying to manipulate employees to ensure their cooperation, though it may not be a very good method, but sometimes managers adopt it because they want to go for a change in case of there is a high resistance. And then explicit and implicit coercion, when you are using threat and coercion, right. And in that case, the change recipients or the employees do not go for resistance. It happens when there is a questions related to survival of the organization is at the risk, and you think that without going for a change, it is not possible for the organization to survive. And then you especially order employees to go for it, accept the change, because if you are not going to accept the change, the survival of the organization is at stake, and then if organization will not be there tomorrow, then what will happen to them, right. So, these kind of coercion activities are used to reduce the level of resistance among the employees. So, now you look at this, these are the basic processes that is used. I have already talked about this communication, training, involving employees, because that would help them to create some kind of ownership, right. You also need to manage their stress, right, which is coming in the mind of the people, and then negotiation and coercion. So, these are the 6 different strategies could be used to reduce or could be put to best use to ensure that the resistance is reduced to a level that is desired among the employees. So, and the other approaches, like there is a cycle, you know, that when you any kind of resistance happens, usually people oppose it and then gradually accept it. So, this is what we know as let nature takes its course. Okay. Let there be different stages through which people go before they finally accept it. We have already talked about it, like denial, resistance, exploration, commitment. So, they could intervene depending upon the level at which the resistance is very high. In that case, what will happen? They would be able to say that yes, at different stages how they are going to ensure that it is going to help. And then the other one is creative counters. Creative counter is something that you need to adopt a different kind of approach. For example, if there is a group of people who are going to resist, right, and they are showing certain signs of resistance, then you need to go for some kind of counter propaganda. Okay. So, you also create a different set of employees who go for it and who are going to counter any kind of argument that is given by those who are resisting it, right. So, these kind of actually these kind of processes are actually used by the managers to reduce the level of resistance among the employees. The other approach is like thought self leadership. It means that you the leaders of the organization, okay, they come forward and then they see that how they can look at those individuals who are basically driving the change and those who are reacting to the change. And then you see that how these leaders are going to overcome influencing the perception of the people, right. So, you need to see that how you can influence the people who perceive that this change is not good for them, right. And there the different other approaches like tinkering, cluzzing and pacing, right. So, bringing about certain change here and there, right, or adopting certain business practices and models to ensure successful change. But here in this case what actually happens? You decide about the pace of the change, you tinker activities, you cluz systems and practices in such a way, so that change is going to be more acceptable to the employees, right, and the resistance is less. And then you also identify that what is the level of resistance, that is the power of resistance. The same resistance can also be used to build support for the change, right, because that would provide you more clear focus. So, in that way resistance will help you, because when employees start asking questions, they raise their eyebrows, they express their fear and say doubts, that also helps you to clear your focus, what kind of change you actually should brought in, and how you can better embrace the resistance, how by addressing those concerns of the employees, right, and also respecting those who are resisting. So, by addressing their concerns and issues, right, and then you say that okay, this is how we are going about it, and you can also join with us, right. So, there is a lot of ways and say means through which you can manage the resistance. So, ultimately in this third week basically we talked about these issues, how to go about diagnosing the change. We also discussed about component and heuristic models, and in this we discussed various frameworks and models. And finally, in the last two sessions we talked about resistance to change and managing resistance. Okay. And these are the textbooks that have been used as a reference. And so, with this we are closing this third week session. Thank you very much.